Gordon Dalgleish here this morning. Delighted to have Euan Loudon with me, Chief Executive of the St Andrews Links. Euan, good morning. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you, Gordon. It's a pleasure to be with you.
One of the things that I always try to understand is how people ended up in the jobs that they're doing, because we're all terribly fortunate to be around the golf world. And I think I saw somewhere where you started life in the golf industry as an assistant professional.
I suppose by today's standard, that probably wouldn't qualify as a definition of what I actually did. But I was born and brought up in South Lanarkshire, about 8 miles outside Glasgow. And I started my golf as a junior at somewhere called Bothwell Castle Golf Club.
Yes.
In 1962. And I learnt my golf from a wonderful, old-fashioned, classic club professional called Sandy Donaldson. Sandy only had one eye, he liked to drink, and he had a beautiful swing. And he taught a little cohort of us, reasonably well, and we sort of played club and some of us county golf at the junior level, and they were idyllic summers. I mean, I hope that kids have a similar experience today, but I spent my entire time at the golf club. Yeah. We thought nothing of playing 3 rounds a day. We thought nothing of hitting 200 balls on the practice ground. We got our money for soda and chips from divot filling and the occasional caddy work. And towards my late teens, Sandy sadly died at the top of his backswing one day in the early 1970s. So a new pro came, and I got to work with him a little bit and did a little bit of teaching and a little bit of working in the shop. So that's the sort of type of assistant rather than anything fancier than that.
Well, I'm sure as you were playing golf in these idyllic summer days, never did you imagine in your wildest dreams that you would end up as the CEO of the Links Trust at St Andrews. I mean, it's a wonderful position in the game of golf that you have, and it must be very satisfying in many respects.
Yeah, I wouldn't have dreamt if you and I had been having this conversation in the early 1970s. Not at all, because I went off and did 2 completely different things. One as a soldier for a while, where I continued to play golf at a reasonable standard for about the next 14 or 15 years, maybe. And had some wonderful experiences doing that. And then I ran a festival, Edinburgh International Festival event in the centre of Edinburgh for about 5 years, and was lucky enough to travel around the world, looking at possible performers to come to Edinburgh in the summer and to audition new talent. And then one day I saw your chat with, or part of it, with the lovely Ken Goodwin the other day. Yes. And he was talking about seeing an advert in the paper in May 2010 for the St Andrews job. And I joined in January of 11. And the last 10 years have just gone in an absolute flash. And it is such a privilege to work with all of the people around about the Links Trust in, trying to develop and sustain the reputation of this place as the home of golf.
Well, you actually segue into something I just want to kind of say with respect to the St Andrews Links. Obviously, we're kind of working our way through the COVID crisis, and I can't speak strongly enough and say strongly enough how impressed PerryGolf and myself and Colin were about how quickly and how strongly you supported and took a leadership position for Scottish golf tourism when there was confusion. It was back in March. Nobody knew quite what was going on in the length of time, but you and the St Andrews Links absolutely stepped up to the plate and gave clarity to the Scottish golf tourism industry that I think will pay dividends long term. So I just wanted to absolutely compliment you on that and the leadership that you showed there. People come to St Andrews, they get on the first tee of the old course, is the dream of their life. But there's so much more to it. And one of the things that I like to try to do with these conversations is so people kind of get a better picture of what's going on that they might overlook when they're there. So that the history of St Andrews, do you have a kind of an elevator pitch? I mean, James Cheap and the rabbit farm and the Tyreham house. I just think that's a fascinating how it all kind of came to be, because I always think that you come to the first tee and there's so much stuff going on around you, and you don't always appreciate. It's the family walking across the Granny Clark's Wynd, and it's the people hanging around, and that all came from different parts of history. How everybody got there? Do you have a short version you can?
Yeah, no, I always find it fascinating to start a conversation like this, because of course, if you teleport yourself back in time, this story starts at about the same time that Christopher Columbus was discovering the New World. Yes. So, the first written references to golf and something that we might in the modern world called football being played on the links at St Andrews are written down in the 1400s. And the first written records of the people of St Andrews having some rights to play on this golf links were written down in 1552 by Archbishop Hamilton. And the document that he issued in 1552 sits in the Special Collections Library of the University of St Andrews, something that I have been lucky enough to see once in the last 10 years. And you're so right to mention James Cheap and the Cheap family, actually, who've played such a heroic part in the slightly more modern history of the links. Because if it wasn't for James Cheap and the court case that he was prepared to bankrupt in the 1800s, then we might not have had golf on the links at St Andrews. And the story that we've known since the early 19th century through to the present may not have existed. I think there are, you could pick any number of watersheds, Gordon, but I think there's an important watershed in the middle of the 1800s, because the coming of the gutter ball, the coming of the railways and a railway line arriving in St Andrews, and the influence of dear old Tom when he came back from Prestwick in 1864, they really started to move, remember, what was only one golf course, I think, up in the prominence of the golfing public. And it wasn't until you get to, I think, another watershed in the 1890s, when the city fathers, or the Toon Councillors, as we call them in Scotland, they decided that they wanted to try and raise the prominence of St Andrews more and take a little bit of control. And it's in that decade that we get the first Parliamentary Act, which gives the town control of the links, and we get the design and build by Tom of the new course, and then the original 12 holes of the Jubilee course. And then I think you could spool, if you wanted to, all the way forward to Arnold Palmer and television and the early 1960s, because the internationalization of St Andrews, I think, owes a tremendous debt of gratitude to Arnold and the people that he persuaded to come to St Andrews in those early days of what we now call, modern professional golf.
Yeah. So you touched on it. Obviously, a lot of it has evolved in the last 50, 60 years for a variety of reasons. St Andrews Links Trust, you run a huge operation. I mean, people don't realize how many people are involved and the contribution to the local economy and the shops that you have now. Can you kind of just speak to that a little bit about the sheer size and of your commercial business?
I mean, we're so lucky to have so many visitors from North America. But I think you're right. People know it's a place with an ancient history. And of course, I feel that the Links Trust is slightly fraudulent in the description of ancient history, because of course we only started life just under 50 years ago. So there was some regional politicking going on here in the late 1960s and the early 1970s. And it was decided that the safest course of action at that time, in order to place what would have been in those days maybe our 400 acres of ground into safekeeping, was to form an independent charitable trust. And its job was then, and remains today, to run this place, which is now grown to about 900 acres, as a public park, and a place where the public, the people, can come and play golf. In the early days, I suspect, I don't know, but I suspect that involved a handful of greenkeepers and a few local worthy people who volunteered to be on a committee to run what would have been, 4 courses in those days? Old, New, Ghibli, Eden. But of course, over time, the nature of what we do here has expanded. It's become a bit more sophisticated, and we have 410 people on the staff. We have a professional management team. I report to a board of 8 trustees who do usually 3 or 6 years each. And those trustees, if you were to distill what their role in life is, I think it would be to be the custodians of these ancient acres of turf, to enhance and protect the renown and the reputation of St Andrews Links, and most importantly, of course, in the modern world, and not been so easy during COVID-19, to generate revenue.
Yep.
Because it is only through the generation of revenue that we can continue to dream the dreams, fulfill the ambitions, and to do so in an economically as well as an environmentally sustainable way.
Talking about that time period and the changes. I mean, we started in business in '84, and it was still, and I remember playing the St Andrews Boys in '70. I think it was probably '76. Long time ago. And the facilities have changed and improved so much from 84 onwards. It was 94 that you were still changing your shoes in the car park, as I recall.
It was.
And there've been so many changes along the way. Do you want to speak to them in the last 35 years, or all the changes that have happened at St Andrews in terms of enhancing the visitor experience?
Yeah, I can't remember whether I was 15 or 16, Gordon, but I had a similar experience. I think we rolled into St Andrews and were slightly underwhelmed by, and in those days, you'll know because you've been here, but people in modern times may find this an unbelievable remark. We played 2 rounds on the old course that day, in the late 1960s. So things have changed. I don't think the watershed is really until, as you suggested, the early 90s, when the building of the Links Clubhouse, amid some controversy, I have to say, having looked at some of the old paperwork.
It would not be St Andrews if there was not some controversy.
Yes, I had a boss once who, in a very long time ago, who said that in the context of the place we were working, he said, what you've got to realize, Euan, is that this is a goldfish bowl, except some of the goldfish are piranhas. And St Andrews sometimes feels a little bit like that.
I understand.
Not often, but a little bit. So I think the building of the clubhouse, and it has become, I think, the beating heart now of the of the links operation was the sort of trigger point of a long process of modernization and investment. There have been new courses. I mean, I think particularly about the Strath and the Balgove and the Castle course in more recent times. There's been an expansion of what would have been called the golf practice area into an academy. There's a huge warehouse that has been built on one site rather than four in St Andrews to house the merchandise for the merchandising operation, which we run at St Andrews Links, but of course has grown infinitely bigger in the last 2 years through us taking on the role of merchandise for the RNA. A new facility at the first of the caddy pavilion, a new cafe, a new halfway in more modern times, and we're working on some new offices at the moment. Again, with the experiences of COVID, there might not be quite so many people in the new office as I first envisioned a couple of years ago. And there are plans to continue that sort of rolling investment, Gordon, over the next decade at least. I'm thinking particularly about, I think, a rebuild of the Golf Academy, a rebuild of the Eden Clubhouse, and a new strength and conditioning centre adjacent to the Golf Academy, which is going to address some of the physical health aspects of a golf agenda for our customers in the future.
You know, you referenced that the kind of the starting point for much of the development, if you will, was the Links Clubhouse in '95, and obviously the Links Trust has done so much. But you know, there's all the other projects that have morphed around St Andrews. So no longer is St Andrews a one-trick pony, for want of a better description. You know, between Kingsbarns and Dumbarnie Links and the Duke's Course and the Fairmont Hotel, I mean, it's just St Andrews has become this, you know, terrific destination that doesn't have to be a one-night stay and to play the old course. So, you know, in that context, you're kind of somewhat of a victim of your own success, because as there's more people staying longer, there's more hotel rooms, big refurbishment going on of Russell's just now. How do you balance all of the competing demands from different constituency groups of local golf clubs and local homeowners and visitors? And it's just events, and that's just got to be one of these good challenges, but a challenge.
Yes, well, as we were saying a moment ago, on the one hand, you and I know that St Andrews is a blessed place. I mean, it has the third oldest English-speaking university in the world. It has an ancient medieval street pattern still that we can walk around at night doing our ghost tours and things like that. Yep. It's got 90 bars and restaurants. As you say, it's got a nice suite of hotels now across the spectrum of, you know, sort of self-catering apartments through to 5-star. And I suppose the big stakeholders in town are the R&A, the university, ourselves, our local golfers. But of course, there are many other stakeholders in what we might put in inverted commas, the tourism industry, who we have to have relationships with. I think one of the reasons I was hired by the trustees of the St Andrews Links Trust was they thought that I could probably, and had a bit of life experience of deploying my judgment, both diplomatically and tactically, tactically and tactfully.
Yeah.
And you know, talking to people and explaining that you can't have everything just exactly the way that you want it, because there are so many things to be balanced off. I mean, we had more than 250,000 rounds played over the golf courses last year, which, you know, when you think about the old course being closed on a Sunday, and therefore missing a lot of days throughout an average calendar year, is a pretty big number. And we still manage, I hope, to balance at around about 50-50 the amount of play that a homegrown golfer gets to have on the links with the amount of play that visitors from further afield have. And you know, the continued pilgrimage, if that's an appropriate word to use, of people from where you're sitting, your side of the pond today, to this place for the foreseeable future, is the thing that is going to sustain, you know, the level of emotional commitment that lies beyond, you know, Northeast Fife and lies beyond Scotland, and of course, let's not forget, helps to offset the cost of golf for people who are more locally based. I mean, that is the plain reality of it.
That's kind of how Scottish golf, in many respects, whether it's a public golf course or a private golf course, or you know, does deliver terrific experiences, and kind of the finances of it all seem to work. The Open comes, you're in a nice cycle there. You had, when you started in 2010 and then 15, and you're in a nice cycle of every 5 years. Obviously that's changed now, coming in 22. What's your experience when the Open comes in and the challenges that creates? Obviously you've got restrictions on the old course. How do you kind of tackle that and manage that? Because that's obviously creates an interest in St Andrews that is just remarkable from a broadcast. People see St Andrews and the stories told around the world.
Absolutely. Do you know, for somebody who was once connected with the military, I can't resist using a military metaphor to answer your question, which is, it seems to me that we appear to be in charge of the deck of an aircraft carrier. And our job is to get the deck ready. And that takes quite a lot of effort, and it takes quite a lot of time. And then the tournament organizers land all of their planes on the deck of the aircraft carrier, and thousands of tons and miles of industrial quantity of infrastructure, you know, which land. We then have a brilliant competition. We find our champion golfer, and then all the planes take off and they disappear into the distance, and they leave the deck empty for the rest of us to get on with our existence in golf for days, months, and years to come. And I came and looked. I had a snoop around in 2010 when I was researching for the interview. And then, of course, I was involved in the thick of it in 2015. And it is all hugely professional. And people in America who've been involved or looked at close quarters at the organization of professional tournaments will relate to this. The people who work together to deliver these things are hugely professional. They know each other well. They've been doing it for some time. And dare I say, as an interested observer, it seems to me that the whole thing takes place quite seamlessly. You know, there's no huff and puff and bother and that sort of thing. And of course, for us, our attachment and involvement of this has got a little bit more complicated for the last 2 years, because doing the merchandising operation for the RNA has led us from 2 years ago at Carnoustie, which was a great start, to the truly exceptional experience at Royal Portrush last year, when, well, it was just everything that you would ever hope it would be for the first time back on the island of Ireland for a while. And now looking forward to St George's delayed, and then the 150th coming back to St Andrews in 2022. And if someone was to ask me what it feels like to be in the midst of all of that from the trust's point of view, I couldn't do better than perhaps pointing to you of a sports television broadcaster called Sally Nugent, who I remember overhearing in 2015 saying to camera, "This is amazing. This is where the most famous golf venue in the world turns itself into the greatest sporting venue in the world for a few days." And I think that's what we feel when the Open comes to town.
That's a great way of describing it. What is your vision for St Andrews in the next 10, 15 years? You've talked about some of the projects that you're working at. How do you try to balance the development with the history and the tradition and keeping everybody kind of on side? How do you see that vision playing out?
Well, I'll tell you the longer answer to that, I suppose, in a minute. But the short answer is you need to remember to have a monkey on your shoulder from time to time that is whispering in your ear occasionally the phrase, "Just because you can doesn't mean you should."
Yes.
It's good to be reminded of that. I think in balancing the two dilemmas that you flagged up there. But I would like to think that in 50 years' time, the Links Trust will have prospered, St Andrews will have prospered, and that if there was any good thing to come out of COVID-19, as it is connected with the game of golf and the disruption that we've experienced recently, it would be this. And I don't know if this has happened in America. I suspect it has, but I certainly feel it in the UK, that the mental and physical health benefits of our beloved game, where you take a group of people and ask them to do something that matches etiquette, fair play, human skill, and technology in a social setting out of doors, is something to be treasured. It's something that Rick Olson, the CEO of Toro, the other day told me in an email, has increased the interest in the number of children in America who are registering for golf experiences and lessons. You would like to think that we've been given an opportunity in a dark sort of health moment here to make something of that. So we are committed to continually developing the Links as a place where we deliver unique and memorable experiences to all of our customers, to play, to learn, to shop, and to a certain extent, relax. I think I'm not a great technophile, but I'm also not a Luddite. And I think that digitization and the way that we consume the game in the future is going to make a mark on us in the coming decade. And I think for us, that will allow us to engage with fans, in inverted commas, all around the globe, possibly in a way that we never imagined in St Andrews. And I've got a statistic for you that somebody told me about a year ago when we were having a think about something to do with this. And that was a collaboration that we had with the Old Course going on the World Golf Tour computer game.
Yeah.
And somebody asked us, we were all sitting around a table trying to think hard and have clever ideas. Somebody asked us if we could guess how many holes of the Old Course had been played since the game had gone live. And of course, we all took a guess. The answer, to which none of us got close, was 250 million holes of the Old Course had been played in 7 months or so that the game had been up. That tells you something about the way that you can engage with people and the way that people can consume things in a different way. But it's only part of the story. The real story is always about walking in the footsteps of giants. It's always about feeling that turf underneath your feet as you stand on the first tee of the old and nervously wonder where this ball's going to end up. It's that sort of writing your own history in the flesh, as it were, that will remain the backbone of what goes on here.
Yeah, I mean, golf, there's so many attributes of golf. Golf is so difficult as a sport to kind of master, for whatever, or the golfing gods let you play well for a few days and then take it away from you. But there's so many character attributes that are fundamental, and I think such a fundamental part of the Scottish being and the way that Scottish people look at the world. And I think that's also kind of part of the reason that St Andrews has prospered, because it's so authentic. There's nothing fake about it. It is what it is. And I think it adds to the experience, and that's why people from, whether it be from the United States or Asia or anywhere else in the world, just want to come and see what it's all about.
Yeah, I think picking that theme up, we did some work last year with NBC to make a documentary film, which has not come out yet, but about St Andrews, the place, not just about golf, although that's a strong thread within it. And there's a little Gordon, who's our course manager of the old course, on it. And he looks straight into the camera. This place is unique. He said, you couldn't lift it up and put it anywhere else. It only fits here. And I think that's such an apt way of describing what you said.
Yeah, I mean, and I keep on falling back on that. You get onto the first tee of the old course and you look around at all the stuff that's going on. It fits in St Andrews, but if you were to try to recreate that, you just, it's like, really, it's terrific.
Yeah.
So, Euan, you've been very generous with your time. When time comes for you to hang up your spurs and retire, and you look back on this portion of your career, what kind of do you think will be the proudest of what you've been able to contribute to the game of golf and St Andrews specifically, and your input and direction and shaping of the whole experience?
Well, I always think it's slightly immodest, Gordon, to answer questions like that honestly, but because PerryGolf and the St Andrews Links are such strong friends, I'll try to be modest and answer it. Do you know, I don't honestly know the answer to that question, but if I was to pick out two things which might surprise people, one would be that I have been so lucky that I have found myself in the midst of a bunch of people, who I work with, who all absolutely understand that we have all got this golden seed in the palm of our hand. And our job is to look after this golden seed until it is time to pass it on to the next people who come after us. And getting people to appreciate that emotion and that point has been something that I've been very committed to since the day I arrived. And the other thing I think is that, this organization has doubled in size in the last 10 years, which is good, and it's hard work and it's big ambition and so on and so forth. But the people in the organization, I think, that I've been lucky enough to team up with these last few years, have a sense of confidence about who they are and what they do. And if that last idea was the legacy of my time here, I would go to my pipe and my slippers as a happy man.
I think that's a terrific way of looking at it. I mean, because I've got a 14-year-old son, and you try to explain to him about the difference between kind of carried confidence and arrogance.
Yeah.
And it's just, you can see people that carry themselves in a confident manner.
Yeah.
And they just know who they are and they behave accordingly. and the right, as opposed to somebody that's arrogant. And I think that the way that you described it was much more eloquent than I about about that you've got you're wanting to maintain and pass it to the next generation in a better way than you received it.
Yeah.
And I think that also kind of works into the Scottish being about just things and not just knocking down to build something new, right? It's just so St Andrews certainly is the kind of the absolute epicenter of kind of trying to do things right, and kind of playing the long game and delivering the experience. And we certainly, as a business, have sincerely appreciated our relationship over the years with the Links Trust and with St Andrews, because if it wasn't for that, I mean, you drive so much of Scottish golf tourism. It's not just in Fife. I mean, right, and that's to be commended. So I sincerely appreciate your time. I hope people have got a better sense when they do get to St Andrews, the significance of the old course, the Links Trust, and all that you do. So thank you, and hopefully 2021 is a vastly better year.
Yeah, fingers crossed. Yeah.
Fingers crossed. Thanks again, Euan. Very much enjoyed the conversation.